My name is Aideen Howard. I'm Literary Director of the Abbey Theatre, and I'm delighted to be moderating the first panel of our symposium today. I'm going to be joined by three speakers, Gerard Mannix Flynn, Louise Lo and Emilie, who are going to speak on the subject of new memory. But following on from hearing the President's wonderful speech earlier, I thought, to quote from something he said, the panel could equally be called, "What method should we use?" Because in many ways, what I hope today's discussion will raise is the strategies around staging memory and staging trauma, and thinking about the theatre as a shared space for shared memory. The format of today's panel will be that the speakers will present their papers from the podium here, and after all three speakers have finished, there'll be an opportunity for us to have questions and answers. So if you have questions, that'll be the point at which you can put them to the panel. All three of our speakers will be bringing very different perspectives and experiences to bear on the subject that they're going to talk about today. But I think what all three have in common is an interest in the unstaged histories and the unwritten stories which have become the subject of their work, particularly of the institutional abuse stories that have become closer to our attention than ever before in the last decade. I'm interested in the idea of theatre as a space where these different strategies for staging memory can be discussed and rehearsed, and I'm hoping that today's discussion will give us a chance to rehearse and explore the ethics and the practices and strategies of site-specific theatre, of documentary theatre, and of biographical theatre. And the person who's, of course, missing from this discussion, as Fia alluded to earlier on, is Mary Raftery, who edited No Escape for us here at the Abbey in 2010. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the podium an artist, an activist, Gerard Mannix Flynn, who is also a member of Dublin City Council. He has had work performed in the Abbey Theatre, and his work is particularly interesting, not alone in focusing on memory, but in actually problematising the actual presentation and representation of memory. So will you please welcome Mannix.
Dr. On, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm greatly honoured to be here today to deliver some of my thoughts on memory and the experience of memory and the challenges to memory and the problems of memory. I think it's a very important subject. I think it's an extremely important time. I think it's very timely, this symposium, and I think it gives us an opportunity to break through and beyond and take all of the good stuff with us to create a new. I thought about this issue for quite a long time. I must have written about 10 different papers. I must have read about 100 books. And finally last night I sat down and wrote this. So it's fresh in my memory. And I hope that it's going to remain in yours. So here goes. We are shaped by yesterdays, past generations of our family, hand-down formed rituals as facts to live by. Generation after generation, commemoration after commemoration, rigid to custom, tradition and strict rule. Ireland and the Irish state draws from a similar past for its authenticity. As people, we seek our identity in the past that is overwhelmingly tragic. We are baptized by and large into a faith based on suffering, sacrifice and death with a promise of the everlasting afterlife. Our very bones carry the memory of a traumatic past, not of our making, and we are captured, held hostage by it, and we are forced. I'll just read this one more time. Our very bones carry the memory of a traumatic past, not of our making, and we are captured and held hostage by it. And as we face into this commemorative decade, we must ask ourselves who we truly are. What would we like to become in our future? Who would we like to be? What new memory can we create now that will change the perception of ourselves as victims and survivors, which keeps us from the ownerships of ourselves? In Ireland, change comes with great reluctance, resentment, and vindictive consequences. We have the case of Savita, the X case, the child abuse issue, the nursing homes, the banking issue, the planning issue, the Northern Troubles, not to mention Limerick City of Culture, and the issues of Temple Bar Cultural Trust. Yet, we find no new way is forged. We remain childlike, hapless. We jump up and down and shout outside of the Dáil, re-elect the same people, on it goes, on it goes. Yet no lessons are learned. No new way is forged. We complain about RTE, the Abbey Theatre, yet we still watch, we still go. Disappointment seems to be our sedative. Appeased by our own complaining, we saunter fatalistically along, our false image intact. Unforgettable, uncomfortable, of course, but alcohol can take care of that. On we go until somebody mentions any of these institutions or individuals, and then the backlash begins. You are accused of having sour grapes. You're accused of personalising. The keepers of no change make you out to be a loose cannon, negative, destructive, dangerous, a threat to the state, a threat to their cosy little number. And we all sing the chorus line, "Sure, it's not all that bad, sure, it could be worse, let's move on." Or in the immortal words of one Pat Cox, "I'm determined to hit the restart button." Not address the problem, not learn from the problem, but simply reset it, so the problem seems to never have happened. That is the Irish way. So what should we do with themes like the role of memory in making theatre? The challenge of commemorating historical events? Well, you simply make something new. Something that will grow and be free, big and open. The making of new memory, new acknowledgement, the immediate now, your now, our now. How do you feel rather than how you think? The challenge is not so much about the challenge of commemorating historical events like 1940, 1980, 1960, 1922, or 2022, the lockout, the Battle of the Boyne, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Clontarf. It's about how you set yourself free from them and how you free them from us, create the new legacy. We have to remove ourselves from all means from our own institutionalization. Otherwise, the continuation of indoctrination of our collected memory by the state and other agents through spectacle of events, commemorative, will succeed in reducing us to spectators, lookers-on, and not the true owners of our own history. Theatre events are made from interrogated memory, from memory which is investigated and creatively interpreted. The burial of active memory and conscious recall is a form of conditioned self-censorship. In a way, we have to save memory from being consigned to memory. We must resist at all cost adopting the ruling class memory and the magical nostalgia masquerading which separates us from truth. Their vision of our memory is akin to a closed-down thing, coma-induced. Our conscious memory struggles to be switched on, so tread softly, because you tread on my memory. Memory cannot be told thus far and no further, so let new memory arise. Without interference, without baggage, memory is not a thing of the past. Facebook. Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, and the like. They are the enemies of live human memory. The mobile phone and other machines have the potential to erode and take over our relationships with our memories and our private self. Synthetic history has begun out there in the World Wide Web, in our hands, on our persons, in our houses, in our environments. Our intimate relationships with our private selves and self-discovery, that mystery, that journey is being surrendered to the triumphant capitalism and consumerism. No Escape at the Peacock, some time ago, also part of this symposium, in my view, is an exercise in an excuse for the lack of artists' involvement in exposing state terror and church inhumanity, as well as society's indifference to what went on in state institutions in this country. Theatre makers in this case take a whitewashed state document, the Ryan Report, take witness statements, and do a kind of pageant enactment, turning real events into theatre commodity, rendering the struggle for truth and justice into a night out in the theatre for the elite cultural classes. It is easy to move an audience to crying and feeling sorry for what happened to the poor kids in the institutions in this society. It is much more courageous, though, to enrage a public in order to change this society. In this instance, the state theatre, using a state documents in furtherance of its own self-service and appeasement, true story and real events are stolen from their owners. The authentic voice is silenced, and we are estranged again, orphaned, this time from the very few things we can truly call our own, the memory of the experience of what happened to us. The theatre in this instance kills the possibility of inclusion for an entire generation of a deeply oppressed class. The struggle is betrayed, and the uncomfortability of Irish society is laundered out and made safe. New memory can only arrive with true authenticity on an uncontaminated platform. It won't hold or lend itself to the notions of those with no real cultural credibility who float about aloof. New memory will seek the risk-taker, the brave, the daring, not those who lick up to the Arts Council or their funders, or who wish to continue to promote the lie, the status quo of the fake state. The Risen People, the show, sets out to make old a new play, sets out to make new an old play. An old story about past real events. The primary purpose of staging the work at the Abbey Theatre, the State Theatre, is to acknowledge the anniversary of the 1913 lockout 100 years ago. This meaning gets lost at the Abbey Theatre because of the failure to acknowledge what they have created, which is the theatre of commemoration, not the theatre of the risen people. What needs now to happen here is a process of disentanglements from versions of the work to a celebration of the new possibility of a new public that will carry a lasting memory of commemorative theatre that has meaning and healthily acknowledges the events, the real events that took place in this city and in this country. Future generations have a right to be free from a contaminated, institutionalized collective memory that enslaves them and closes down the possibility of a past as a celebration. Our task is to rescue, recover history memory, and the event, recover. Our task is to recover. Our task is to rescue and recover historical memory and events from a brutalized past and transform them into celebratory events, free from brutalized memory. Now is the time to create something new. Now is the time to create a new hour, a new day, a new memory. Now is the time to create that day. This symposium is a very good start. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're straight into the thick of the controversy. can I please now introduce, to carry the torch, artist and theatre maker Louise Lo, who runs her own company in New Productions. You'll be familiar with her work from this year, the work that she did called 13. You'll also be familiar with the work that she did in Laundry, in The Boys of Foley Street, and also Louise is working on a new project at the Abbey Theatre, so she may speak a little bit about that a little later as well. Louise.
Good afternoon, everyone. Theatre has traditionally played a very important role in making aware the resonance of the past among the present. All cultures have recognised that theatre, because by virtue of its liveness and repetition, presents an embodied experience of place and memory, a sense of coming back, of repeating again and again. And so the relationship between theatre and cultural memory is a deep and complex one. One could say that every play is a memory play, as it's subject to continual adjustment and when recalled in new circumstances and contexts. Standing on this stage, I ask us now to pause for a moment and remember a performance that we may have seen here. Now consider every play that is played out over that. The retelling of stories already told, the reenactments of events already enacted, the re-experience of emotions already experienced are and always have been central to theatre. Every performance embeds trace of the performance it was before and has yet to become. Every performance is never exactly repeatable, but continuously shifting, and this becomes an act of playing a memory of itself on top of memory. Myself and visual artist Owen Boss have worked together for the past decade, and since 2009 have existed as New Productions. Today, New has a core team and a family of artistic contributors. Over the past few years, we have made 10 productions. Last year, we presented 1,700 performances as part of a series of works exploring the impact of the 1913 Dublin knockout on today. We estimate that over 38,000 people engaged with our work in the last year alone. Our work is about the history of contemporary life. Working in real environments and slipping between the artificial and the real, we are interested in the changing nature of contemporary cultural thinking. We are influenced by theatre, visual art, and dance, and are particularly fascinated by the energy that exists in the spaces between those. We use non-traditional sites and immersive engagement to create shared intimacies between audience and place and audience and performer. We are intrigued by the architecture of existing environments and when we talk of community, we understand this to mean community of space, place and interest. Within our practice, we collaborate with a variety of local experts, organisations and individuals who in turn inspire the work. We begin each piece by setting ourselves a series of questions. The central question we ask of our audience is, how do you choose to engage? We ask audiences to witness, feel, comply, and act. We ask audiences to question themselves within the work and in a larger way within the world. And during that process, we are constantly asking questions of ourselves. The performances we make are outcomes of a long devising process, which is made on site over a long period of time. Each production contains multiple narrative strands happening at once, and the audience become participants within the environment, seeing the show through a lens of now, then, now. Placing the audience at the very centre of this practice ensures that they are doing so much more than just looking. Imagine for a moment you're an audience member and you've come to see one of our shows. Imagine that when you enter the world of the play, you become separated from your fellow audience. The other world engulfs you and you no longer see its edges. You are implicated as opposed to removed, addressed as opposed to ignored. There is no fourth wall. Though sometimes you view scenes through carefully composed apertures, such as peepholes, which gives you the feeling of being inside a film, you are at times completely surrounded by or engaging directly with the performers. They speak to you and may call your name. They seem to know you or expect you. Every sense is tingling with taste, smell, and textures of your surroundings. What makes this work all the more immersive is that very often it is not happening in some carefully controlled, constructed environment. Very often it is colliding with real life. Very often the performance for which you are central of is happening on the street, enveloped by real time and real life. Within the work, we invite audience to break the rules. Move around, talk to the actors and mold the action. This unleashes a dynamic meaning-making process. It is important to note we never expect an audience member to play a role or take on a character. Even when the action of the play is within the past, they can't be but themselves in the present. And some audiences choose not to engage. Instead, become voyeurs with a close-up view of the action. Others, however, choose an active hand in dictating the narrative they want to see or the characters they want to follow. It's up to them to behave or how to behave, to embrace or observe it. But our motive is consistent. To give agency so audiences can, to borrow a phrase from Peter Crawley, become the dramaturgs of their own experience. I've been invited today to speak about new memory. I want to talk a little about that in context of our Monto project. Through a series of works positioned inside the community, we're currently in the process of completing a 4-part project that explores the quarter-mile area of Foley Street. Performed for just one audience member at a time, the comprising productions of World's End Lane, Laundry, The Boys of Foley Street, and later this year, Vardo. Through these performances, the history of the area across decade is distilled into highly personal encounters. Each of these productions tells us about things and people in time and space, about what existed and what was made up, about conflicts and tensions and what was and what could have been. They also serve as an opportunity for us to explore our state and microcosm as we approach this important decade of commemoration. Because through each piece, we're attempting to ask the question, who are we and why are we? To quote theatre maker Andy Field, we're not interested in simply reenacting or recreating events that we think may have happened in the past, but with a desire to reimagine and remake everything that was radical and alive about the past within the present. Ultimately, we are interested in creating environments where 100 years of history can fold, clash, interact, contradict, and tell its own story in its own way. Together, we hope that all 4 parts will reveal the interpenetration of space, place, and culture, creating an evolving work of historical and contemporary detail. Immortalized in song, and later in the Nightown chapter of James Joyce Ulysses, the first of our series, World's End Lane, was an intimate one-to-one exploration of the notorious Monto area of the North Inner City. This was once the largest and most prolific red light district in Europe. Told in multiple tenses through the eyes of 5 pivotal real-life characters, audiences of 3 were divided and taking on a rotating journey where they got to experience the area as a punter, tourist, and complicit worker. Even though we were exploring the area in 1925, the scenography, music, costume, and performance were all emphatically contemporary. This insisted that the work was immediately relevant and never nostalgic or backward-looking. After the closure of Monto, the streets previously littered with brothels were demolished and the land gifted to the Daughters of Charity to extend their convent for fallen women. Following on from that then, Laundry was performed as part of Dublin Theatre Festival in 2011 and once again picked up on the female history of the area. In an Ireland whose collective consciousness is reeling from the exposition of these institutions, the issues of naming and witnessing was at the heart of the performance. Being witness is a live process. We wanted to explore how traumatic memory could be transmitted without using narrative, without making up fictions, and using as few instructions as possible. We isolated audience members and engaged them on a continuous journey through the building. As they moved, the women materialized, through semi-derelict corridors, through water, mirrors, and ultimately through time. We didn't wish to create life as it was, nor even life remembered, but life for these women as it had been forgotten. In making Laundry, we wanted to ultimately recognize ourselves and the actions of our state. The Boys of Foley Street, which then followed, was one of our most ambitious projects to date. Performing 456 shows durationally over 11 hours each day of Dublin Theatre Festival, it explored the 3rd regeneration of the area. It worked essentially in real time around 2 concentric circles, which facilitated us to be able to create 4 distinctive narrative journeys simultaneously. It looked at the area in the 1970s and 1980s through a period of immense change, the demolition of tenement housing, the impact and rise of heroin, the Dublin Monaghan bombings, the Concerned Parents Against Drugs movement, and ultimately a community imploding in itself. In making this entire cycle of work, we thought a lot about technology and how it's changed our cultural landscape. We are fascinated with how radio frequency identification technology creates new cultural spaces. Working with scientist and engineer Dr. Niamh Shaw, we explored how to embed this technology into the work. She created small mini-computers called Arduinos, which essentially scanned the movement of an unknowing audience members, cueing actors, triggering sound, light, and large-scale projections as they passed. On top of this technology, we bombard audiences with textures, taste, and smell. We connected the productions by inserting carefully chosen motifs of each production within each production. For example, the song Till unifies all 4 parts. The Boys of Foley Street documentary is playing in a car during Laundry. In World's End Lane, the tarot cards will prove central to Vardo. In Varda, we will return again to methylated spirits. And how often have we been dragged through time by an unexpected smell? If I asked us all now to think of the smell of chalk, where would it immediately take us? In our work, we consider and use smells to evoke, calm, or provoke. They provide the body with another way of encoding and memory within the performance. In World's End Lane, the smell of eugenol oil evoked an unfamiliar and heady response. In Laundry, the smell of carbolic soap and milk brought us straight to an institution. In Boys of Foley Street, it was the overlap of everyday residual smells, such as the smell of cooking and Jay's fluid. The action or handing or gifting our audience a tangible object to take away with them is also another way to ask them to remember. Sometimes audience members would deposit these objects in the nearest bin, and others say they still have a bar of carbolic soap buried in the back of a drawer and on a shelf, that the Virgin Mary Met statue still sits on a desk, or the long-forgotten taste of a big-time bar brought them straight back to the 1970s. This kind of immersive, site-specific work is no longer an alternative or fringe genre, but symptomatic of increasing diversity in art form. Our work extends the debate beyond interaction between performance and space, beyond how the past is propelled into the present. Ultimately, the past is present in the visceral experience of our audiences. Never nostalgic, we aim to produce sensory-rich experiences that encourage participation. And it is through their involvement that the audience become auteurs in the event, creating new and individual meaning and memory. The particulars of each performance may fade, but the semblance of the experience will remain in our sense memory. The memory becomes embodied in each viewer, and only through recalling all of the senses can it then be remembered or shared. Thank you.
Louise, thank you very much. I still remember the horrible experience of coming back into the room where I'd left my carbolic soap the day after I had seen that show, and the sense memory that involved. All right, our third speaker on today's panel is Dr. Emilie Pine. Emilie lectures in modern drama in UCD. She's published widely in the fields of Irish cultural and memory studies, and is the author of The Politics of Irish Memory, Performing Remembrance in Contemporary Irish Culture. Thank you.
Famously, Theodor Adorno argued that poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. Adorno's point is that art is impossible after trauma because the aestheticizing of trauma removes some of its horror. But this is not, as many people assume, an argument against making art after trauma, but rather a clarion call for artists and audiences to think about the kind of art that is made. Because art is essential in the post-traumatic world. It can help to express some of the trauma, particularly when other forums are closed to hearing about it or commemorating it. This has been the case in Ireland, where it fell to the arts decades before any official investigation to open up the closed world of institutions and the memory of institutional abuse. Today, what I want to focus on is Adorno's understanding that trauma changes the world, therefore it changes art. Because if art is to respond adequately to trauma, it cannot simply aestheticize it, it must instead perform differently. And so perhaps the best response that art can make in the wake of trauma is to change the rules, to challenge the audience by choosing different representational aims, to be like trauma itself, barbaric. We can ask then what kinds of trauma art, or for the symposium's purposes, trauma theatre, can choose. In very broad terms, theatrical narratives divide into two main types: familiarizing and defamiliarizing. Familiarizing narratives tell us stories about the world we recognize, and crucially, that we are comfortable in and with. Defamiliarizing narratives, on the other hand, make us uncomfortable, and as a result, make us look at the world anew. And I think it falls upon trauma theatre to be defamiliarizing, to make the stories and the characters being told new to their audience. This is not about punishing the audience, you'll be glad to hear, or, and this is important, about traumatizing the audience simply as a way of communicating a victim's trauma. The need for trauma theatre to be defamiliarising is about creating, as Louise and Mannix have talked about already, active and engaged spectators, audiences who are aware of their involvement in the process of meaning making. The reason that engaged audiences are so vital in trauma theatre, and in particular in relation to hidden trauma, is precisely because of past problems with disengagement. In relation to institutional abuse, much of the Irish public reported a general sense that the abuses happening behind religious walls were not known or fully understood. But that can't be true, because the institutions were seen. They were seen by the communities that abutted their walls, by the families whose members were committed to them, by the courts who sentenced children and women, by the government inspectors that visited, and the governments that funded them. So how can we explain the failure to understand what was happening within them? Because while they were seen, they were not perceived. This problem of perception is not a literal blindness, but a failure, an inability, and a refusal to interpret what was being seen. It was a failure of spectatorship. And so the theatre that comes afterwards, after the initial trauma, and after the trauma of being not seen, must set that right and must be about active spectatorship. The result is not only a commemorative community, but renewed social agency through active spectatorship. Two of the forms of theatre which have proved internationally hugely powerful in this context and which are only becoming now relatively known in Ireland are documentary and verbatim theatre and site-specific theatre. So I want to address now for a few minutes these forms with references to a new productions Laundry, Mannix Flynn's James X, and the Abbey and Mary Raftery's No Escape. These are three very different kinds of shows that don't look the same and are not performed in the same ways. Yet what all three productions have in common is the insistence that the audience act as a partner in the co-production of meaning and truth. Laundry by A New Productions is a site-specific piece of theatre where, as you've heard from Louise, audience members are led singly through the former convent and Magdalen Laundry on Sean McDermott Street, which is essentially around the corner from where we are now. The piece is part of a trilogy, or a four-part now, of work by A New Productions, which aims to open up the history of this part of the capital, and in so doing to raise the profile of issues from the past which continue to be problematic, such as poverty, violence, and crucially disenfranchisement. The production required each spectator basically not to be a spectator, but to become actively involved in the production, such as unbinding a young woman's body before she bathes, or helping another woman to escape. These interactions require ethical decisions to be made, and the audience very often felt pressurized to carry out the actions. When the young woman, for instance, escapes from the laundry, the audience member is bundled into a waiting taxi, and the taxi driver says, "Do you know her?" The test, of course, is whether you say yes or no. If you say yes, you open yourself up to his scornful scrutiny. If you say no, you're guilty of disavowal. And the question here is, how involved do you want to be, and what kind of responsibility are you willing to accept? Though the other two productions that I'm going to talk about occur more traditionally in a theatre and on a stage, they are no less implicating. Flynn's performance of James X is, unsurprisingly, full throttle and makes for disturbing witnessing. When James is incarcerated in Letterfrack, he appeals to anyone who will listen. "Somebody tell someone. They make us squeal and dance like little pigs. Someone come and get me. Where are you? Where are you? Someone tell someone." The isolation of the voice here is heart-wrenching, but the criminal wrong is that no one told anyone. Flynn provides documents to support his narrative, emulating a key trope of documentary theatre which uses the archive to underscore truth claims. These documents reveal a counter-narrative written by school inspectors, probation officers, and child psychologists. The most disturbing element or moment of the play is when the performance stops and the actor directly addresses the audience, breaking that secure fourth wall. Flynn produces the stack of documents which classify the child, James X, and demands that the audience become agents of change. And there's a transformation of what's happening on stage, and as a result, a transformation of what's happening in the audience and what being an audience means. That sense of active spectatorship is also vital to No Escape, a piece of documentary theatre commissioned by the Abbey in response to the Ryan Report. And I have to differ from Mannix here and say that I think it was a pioneering and brave piece of work. The play's words are taken by Mary Raftery directly from the report, and she distills what is a huge archive that a single person cannot get through into a selective series of testimonies which an audience can then try to assimilate and take on board. I hope that anyone who hasn't seen this production yet will be able to attend the reading tomorrow night. It's one of those rare moments in theatre that you think every single citizen should see this. No Escape gives the stage over to a series of witnesses, though the testimony is anonymised as it is in the report. In presenting these voices publicly, the play opens up a closed and private judicial inquiry and gives the audience, as a result, a sense of ownership, not only of the findings, but of the process. This is, after all, a shared past, and No Escape makes it part of public discourse, demonstrating how theatre can inspire a sense of collectivity. The play consists of testimony from former victims of abuse, as well as interviews with representatives of the congregations responsible for that abuse. These interviews are eye-opening in terms of showing how a culture of abuse was maintained for so many decades. Abuse of children is not a mystery to be consigned to a bad past, it still happens, nor to a faceless abuser. But rather, it is an all too traceable series of events which led to abuse becoming normative and systemic. The corollary of this is that the refusal to see the abuse, both within and outside the institutional walls, also became normative. All three of these productions I've mentioned prioritize the voices of those who were abused. And in enabling these voices to be heard in their own words, the plays recognize minority voices with universal impact. To go back to where I started, all three of these shows radically defamiliarize the past. They do this by fundamentally shifting the status accorded to different memory groups. In other words, what is being commemorated changes because who is being commemorated changes. If you listen to the voices of the victims, then you get a memorial to victimization. By choosing different representational aims, these three productions rethink the assumptions that commemorative practices are based on, and in this, commemoration has the potential to become a truly ethical act. The purpose of commemoration is not to perpetually enshrine a sense of victimhood or trauma. Rather, it is a vital mode of acknowledging and making public a history of victimization and exclusion. And this is the ethical dimension, with the express purpose that it never happens again. And so one of the most useful questions we can ask over the next few days is how the commemoration and performance of memory can aid the construction of an active and ethical society. Theatre might just have the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have a few minutes for questions to follow up some discussion. So if you have questions, maybe you might, I can't quite see, if we could have some slightly greater house light, might be able to see a little bit better. But if you have questions, there are mics going around the room. So while you find a mic nearby, I have one question, I suppose, prompted by all three of the panelists, but particularly Mannix in response to your provocation in relation to the role of artists and commemoration. And I'm interested in following up your assertion that something like No Escape, which is a response to a state document, is in fact a whitewash which covers up the responsibility of artists. I'd love to hear from you all about what you think the responsibility of artists is. either in regard to that subject or in a greater context.
Well, I suppose the first question is that you have.
Can you hear?
Put on my active voice. Well, I suppose the first thing is that what you had here, you had an inquiry into child abuse, which went on for quite some time and cost 70 odd million euros. You had it in the papers every single day, and then you had the publication of what was known as the Ryan Report, and you had many reports after that. So the public, could inform themselves by reading those books, but they didn't really read them. The other issue in the Ryan Report itself, that in my opinion, the Ryan Report actually closed down the event and basically stopped the event from being aired in a proper place, in a full public inquiry, fully televised in front of the public. It didn't do that either. What also happened within that was also the engineering, whereby the witnesses were commandeered and held away from courts and brought towards the redress board. Now, we know all this in retrospect. The Abbey Theatre comes along, and then decides that it wants to do something. So the issue was going around for donkey's years, so artists didn't really address the issue. The issue of the Monto, the issue of the Magdalen Laundries are part of the culture that I come from, part of the class that I come from, part of what I said in my document about the opportunity being lost for to be included. So all of us that went through the issues of institutional abuse, all of us that were part of the Ryan Murphy and Ferns report are still excluded from that process. The biggest insult was the cheek of the government to try and erect a memorial without actually even acknowledging what had happened. The fact that they wanted to stick that memorial on a sacred place, which is the Garden of Remembrance to those individuals who gave their life prior to this state ever being set up, is another kind of, a trespass and another form of abuse. Well, I do genuinely believe that, that art, that culture is political, and that the opportunity, that you can afford within a theatre can be life-changing. It's extremely unfortunate that the people who have been affected by the Ryan Report, who are the victims of that, didn't get that opportunity. It's not geared towards them. As I said, it's geared towards a cultural class. My opinion about the Ryan Report and its version that was presented down in the Peacock, I went to it 2 or 3 times. And to be quite frank with you, I was completely appalled by it. Now, I take everybody's point that, I'm just another punter in the audience, but for me, it was highly insulting, is what it was. That's my opinion, that actors would come in and regurgitate, true testimony, and turn the truth into what you describe as, or what is described as verbatim theatre. And all of that kind of, theatre-making nonsense should have no bearing on what happened here in this state over a long period of time, or the graveyards that are in Letterfrack, or the babies that are missing, or the ongoing issues. So what theatre can also do, it can also close down something. It can re-aestheticize something and turn it into something that it actually is not. I think it's grand to walk down to the Monto and present a piece of work around the living community who still carry that memory, still carry that real memory. My mother carries that memory. I know that area. The people in Mountjoy Jail carry that memory. So I think you've got to be careful. I think that this symposium and the decade of commemoration afford us great opportunity. They afford us great opportunity. And this is the first time the Abbey Theatre have addressed that issue. So I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable or that I'm down their throats, etc. These are just truths. These are just issues. As I say, they're ongoing situations, but that's the way I felt. That's the way I particularly felt. And it's no disrespect to Mary Raftery, who was a great comrade and a good friend of mine who I worked with. I explained my case to Mary Raftery. I explained exactly the way I felt. And she was inclined to agree with me. But she took an opportunity of a commission from the Abbey. Who wouldn't? But you're taking the public document and you're turning it into a private enterprise. That's what you're doing. Instead, that document, not unlike the kind of tablets that we got. Remember those tablets that we got for the nuclear fallout? I have a load of packages of them anyway, he didn't get them. The Ryan Report should be beside your photograph of President John F. Kennedy, the Pope, Padraig Pearse. It should be on the shelf, least you forget.
Can I respond as well? Is it on? I suppose I kind of agree with Mannix, actually. I think that we started making this kind of work because we wanted to question who we were and why we were, as I said. And I suppose what drew us initially towards the Monto is because 4 generations of my family and myself are from there. and I wanted to question who we were in a very simple way. What drew us to laundry was a friend of mine and her family story that hadn't been resolved. So we were tackling it from the very personal. We are the people who were tackling it for ourselves. And then it became, I suppose, a larger shared experience to whoever wants to come and see it. But I think it's not just the responsibility of those who felt it. I think it's the responsibility of all of us to look at our state, to have it beside the picture of Padre Pio and the Child of Prague, and say, I am also responsible. So what can I do about it?
Can I just say, I think that I would love to see no escape. I totally agree about the risk of aestheticizing trauma. The difficulty is that the Ryan report is however many hundreds of pages and people don't read it. And it needs to be made accessible, and it's not that that is the express purpose of the artist in society, but it is one of the facilitating acts of the National Theatre was to be able to do that. I'd love to see that No Escape get enough funding to tour nationally and to get a wider... In order to make that archive more publicly accessible, I thought it was incredible to hear those voices. I think it differs very much from the verbatim theatre project of the Playhouse in Derry, where the people who have survived suffering or the Troubles, basically, narrate their own stories. And I think that has problems and has been controversial in terms of its traumatic effect on the audience, that it keeps the trauma alive to such a point that you're re-traumatizing audiences. And is our aim to traumatize audiences, or is it to make us think about how trauma has happened in the past and how maybe it shouldn't happen again, how definitely it shouldn't happen again in the future?
Mannix, I know you want to respond to that, and then I'm going to open it up.
I mean, just very briefly, I mean, you have every landscape in the country, in Ireland, every part you walk down, you have churches, you have police stations, you have institutions, you have schools, from Letterfrack to Dangan, from Limerick College of Art to the College of Art out in Dunleary. You've got the DITs down in Waterford, all places where there was horrendous abuse in these institutions. Everybody is aware of that situation. Everybody's totally aware of what is going on in this society. To take out what I believe is a grotesque version of that truth and take it on tour, I would stand on you and right in front of you and stop that. I would totally stop that. To have children running around Letterfrack, you know what I mean, the wood turning college, oblivious to what happened in there. To have Connemara National Park, the landscape where we were raped and tortured on, abused left, right and centre, enslaved on, turned into a national park without anybody ever recognising what happened there, and they're all wandering across this landscape. And this was a landscape of terror, a landscape of conflict, a landscape of where lives were destroyed. The very people whose lives were destroyed need to be the beneficiaries of this work, need to be the people who are liberated. That whole class divide and structure, but there was no middle class people in these institutions. That's not to say the middle class people weren't abused in other settings. But in this situation, what you had an attack, as President Michael D. Higgins rightly pointed out, on women and children, the most vulnerable, the ones that are not celebrated. That attack continues to this day. And you simply cannot turn it into drama. You simply cannot memorialise and turn it into a monument like up in the Garden of Remembrance. And you simply cannot turn it into, no escape without first addressing the massive issues that are out there. Your politicians, your country, your church, okay, need to address these truths, need to make that completely inclusive, and need to account. And at least the documents and the inquiries can lead us towards that. But you'd be very, very wrong to close them down in those versions. I think we need to go beyond those situations. And I don't think yet that these things are historical enough for them to become historical. These things are alive today, and we're still uncovering that truth.
I think that brings us to the extremely important point that we'll be talking about over the next few days, which is the point at which art or representation or aestheticization must end, and where action and political action can actually take place. Now, I'm determined to take at least 2 questions before we finish up.
In answer to the speaker.
There's a microphone there behind you.
It's okay, I can be heard. I'm sure I can be heard. Can I not? Sorry, can I not be heard? I can be heard, I hope. Yeah. Sorry, Mannix, just to reply to that. Surely it's too soon, perhaps, to write a play about that situation. I mean, that happened in the North, didn't it? So many writers couldn't write about the Troubles until they came to a particular point in time. You know, so I think that all those memories have got to be sorted out before a writer can write about, and before a play can be made. It's not timely yet, perhaps. From what you're saying, listening to you, I haven't seen these plays, but it appears to me that it's not time yet to make a piece of art out of these experiences.
I think it's a voice. You can make all the work you want out of them, but they cannot be substitutes for the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And that's what tends to happen here. As I say, we are likely to kind of let it go there, but we need to deal with it. We need to deal with what we were actually part of. So I have no problem with dramatic effects. I have no problem with plays, but they can't replace what is not being actually dealt with, which is the truth, which is the proper investigation in the public domain. These real events happen. Nobody's being prosecuted. No one's been held to account. Thousands of Irish individuals were abused. Hundreds of Irish priests faced thousands of charges in the United States of America. There are inquiries going on in America, Canada, Australia, Berlin, Poland. And what the interesting thing about them is they all lead back to the Irish Catholic Church and they all lead back to the Irish congregations. So it's not yet over. But what is the possibility here, and again, this is very, very interesting, the world will look to us for the answers. The world will look to us for solutions, because I think what we're doing here now is really brave, really courageous, and standing up and challenging even our own ideas. So I don't have a problem with people doing cultural representations of things. It's when they start to supersede what has not been completed, when monument begins to bring down premature closure. That's when you have the problem. If you do a reenactment or a Verbatim theatre piece that's not going to change the very people that it's about, well, then you failed. For instance, in St. Patrick's Institution recently did a report on the appalling conditions that the juvenile children were held in, part of the abuse issue. The unfortunate thing was that not one of those children in that institution could read that report because they didn't have the education to read it. And none of the people up there went up to read that report to them, because that would have radicalised the situation. That would have radicalised it if you read that situation to them. So the people who are, I don't like to use the word the victims or survivors, who have the experience of this abuse, the experience of this oppression, are not getting the benefits of their own story. As I say, there's story theft going on, story acquisition going on. And the theatre could be in danger, as I say, of containing and closing down and continuing the architecture of containment of a huge community out there who are not the victims, but the people who are suppressed by the state and agents of the state in order to go away with themselves. There's your few bob, off you go now.
Can we take a question here, please? And this is going to be the last one before we break.
Sorry, okay. I have a question regarding, it's very related to what's been discussed already, but regarding audience and accessibility. We're sitting here, a few hundred of us, as, in a sense, a cultural class, as Mannix Flynn was saying, talking about theatre, productions of theatre with very, very small audiences. If we're also talking about commemorating and making new memories, how do we expand from an audience of one who's having this immersive experience to a creation of memory and immersive experience by the public and for the public?
And it's something that we consider quite a lot, actually. First of all, we're artists. We have egos, and we want everyone to see the work. So we want to be doing it forever. Like, we want as many people as possible to come and see and participate and partake. I think what we do in terms of making this work, the reason we make it the way we make it is because we want it to be immersive and we want it to feel important. We also manage massive amounts of performances. So we're running for 12 hours a day. So you're running maybe for 12 hours a day all the way through a 3-week festival, which actually equates to a run in a big theatre for a company of our size. So we don't exclude anyone. We make lots of free performances. All of our work last year was free of charge for 13, which was 1,630 performances. So we just make them more of them. We'd love to keep doing it, but we do find value and virtue in making within this cycle of work. That's not to say that we won't go and make something for grand audiences next year, hopefully, or the year after. But for this particular piece of work, this particular cycle, it's important for us to keep it at one person because we want them to take action. It's exactly what you're saying. It's not enough to just present it. We want action and we want responsibility. And we want to be able to see the whites in their eyes while we ask them to do that. So I suppose that's really what it is.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there, but I know our panellists will be outside if you'd like to take the discussion further. Thank you all very much.
One particular distinction, in relation to the work that I make. I do not make work for audiences. I make work for public. I do not create work for audiences. And the fact that James X found itself in the theatre was a complimentary gift to the programme that was presented in the Peacock. That complimentary programme took none of the box office that was there. We gave the theatre here, out of respect for the National Theatre, the performances of James X free in order to engage with a public. We did our absolute utmost in this venue to try and demystify and deinstitutionalise how you even walk in the door. And I think we managed that. We continue to do that. And we will continue to do that into the future. We do not deal with audience. We do not deal with much of Arts Council and all of that old jargon that's out there, which with all due respect, you want to hold that, that's fine. We deal with the public. That's why, as an individual and as an artist, I'm a politician. I deal with all these issues out there. I'm a real person. Artist, politician are all just part of the makeup of who I am. But I carry real trauma. I believe we all carry real trauma. It's just a question of how you wake up that memory.
Thank you very much. Thank you.